This is Ask the Expert. I'm John Burgess, and our expert today is Robert Tavelli, who is president of NCCS Inc. Welcome, Robert.
Thank you.
If you're admitting someone to a hospital and they're unconscious, obviously they're there for a reason, they're being admitted to a hospital, what happens if that patient refuses to pay or is a really tough patient to collect from?
Well, obviously, the fact that the patient's unconscious is a good reason to have them in the hospital in the first place, and they're going to need the treatment. The issue of whether or not they can pay or whether or not they're willing to pay, it really comes down to the fact that they did receive the services and they're most likely obligated to pay for any portion of the debt that they would normally be responsible for. Such as, obviously if there's a contract with their insurance company, they're not responsible to pay that debt. But for any portion of the debt that they're personally liable for, they are still liable for the debt because they did receive the services. It's process driven, so if the person isn't going to pay voluntarily but they have the ability to pay, then you might need to take action in reference to the legal process. On the other hand, part of our job is also to identify people that cannot pay their debt. And we're kind of a natural screening process to identify those folks that really can't afford to pay their debt. A lot of times the fear of being turned over to a collection agency is really overly exaggerated. If the agency is working professionally and ethically, they're going to help the person resolve their problems. And we find that actually most people do want to pay their bills.
Now, if they're a minor and they're brought in by a relative, what happens there?
Well, if they're brought in by a relative or anyone for that matter, obviously the people that are responsible for the minor are the parents of that minor. That's more of a statutory issue, that the parents are responsible for the minor's services for necessaries of life up until the age of maturity. Generally, the rule of thumb is that the party bringing the patient in is not necessarily always responsible for the debt. There are cases where somebody has guardianship over the patient and they might be responsible. They could actually sign something stating that they will be responsible, and it could make them responsible, but each case is a little bit different and has to be scrutinized on its own merit.
What if that patient's been brought in by a parent and there's been a divorce?
Well, regardless of whether or not there's a divorce, both parents are still responsible for that patient as long as they're a minor up until the age of maturity. A lot of times a divorce decree might state that one parent is responsible, but that's really an agreement between the two parents, and almost all of the time both parents that are the parent of that child are responsible for the debt.
Great information today, Robert, from North Coast Collection Service. You have a terrific website. Why don't you give us your web address?
Sure. www.nccs-inc.com.